Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. If you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do here on my channel, I cover true crime cases, and all the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older, so if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe go down below, click that subscribe button, and also make sure to turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. So we are officially in September, and if you've been a viewer of mine for a while now, you probably already know that for the last 4 months of the year, I have different themes for each month, with September always being Solved September, where I cover just solved cases for the entirety of the month. Today, we're going to be going over an extremely heartbreaking case that took over 5 decades to solve. It's cases like these, though, that give hope for other cold cases to finally be solved as well. This is the solved case of Nancy Bennallack. Nancy Marie Bennallack was born on June 13th of 1942 in Nevada, San Bernardino County, California, to parents Elaine and Brian Bennallack. Information online regarding her personal life is limited, but there are 2 things I wanted to mention about her that I came across in an article released by the Sacramento Bee. The first is that she was a huge animal lover. A friend of hers stated that she would cry if she heard about anything having to do with harm to an animal. She especially loved cats. She was a very sensitive and kind-hearted person. The second is something a lot of women did back then. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall, but she always would wear her hair very big to appear taller. These are just 2 things that I found very sweet and very personable about her. Nancy had graduated from Nevada Union High School in 1960 and then moved to the bustling city of Sacramento to attend stenotyping school. Now, during October of 1970, Nancy, a spirited 28-year-old, was working as a court reporter and had been for about 4 years then. In the past 6 months, though, she had been assigned to work at the juvenile court. She lived alone on the 2nd floor of the Tahitian apartments at 1830 Bell Street. From my research, they were called the Tahitian apartments back then, but are now called the Polynesian apartments. Things were going well for her at this time. Not only had she found a fulfilling career, she also found love. Her fiance was Ferris Salami, the county's chief assistant public defender. The 2 of them were set to marry on the 28th of November. They had only announced their engagement publicly back in August of that year. Nancy had so many things in life she was looking forward to, but her life would be tragically cut short on a quiet autumn night. Nancy and Ferris had spent the night of October 25th at Ferris's brother's home for dinner, and then simply enjoying each other's company at her home until the late hours. However, as the hands of the clock reached 11:30 p.m., Ferris bid farewell to Nancy and embarked on his journey back to his humble abode. As Ferris departed, Nancy curled up in her bed, her heavy eyes yearning for a blissful slumber. She was very tired at this point. She had to be up early the next morning for work that started at 9 a.m. Ferris would later tell detectives that when he left, the back sliding glass door of the apartment had been left slightly ajar so the cat could go out on the balcony and then go back inside whenever it chose to. The following day, though, Nancy did not show up for work at the juvenile center. This was completely unlike her. She had always been on time. She was always so responsible. If something had come up in her life, she would have definitely called and let them know. One of her coworkers, Joella Moncrief, phoned her son, Jack Moncrief, and asked him if he could go check on Nancy. They were very close. The apartment manager, Lyndon Anderson, opened the door to Nancy's apartment to let Jack in, and within a few moments of walking into the apartment, Jack found Nancy's lifeless body. Somewhere between 11:30 p.m. the prior night and the next morning when he entered her apartment, Nancy had been brutally murdered and left lying on her floor in nothing but her underwear. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Department was notified of his findings, and they took it from there. They would discover that the 28-year-old had been stabbed over 30 times, that she had nearly been decapitated, and she had defensive wounds on her hands and arms, meaning she definitely fought back. Based on the wounds on her hands, it was apparent that she had tried to grab the knife from the culprit. Authorities would also discover that it wasn't a forced entry, that whoever took her life had made his way into her apartment through the back sliding glass door after climbing the fence in the back. The killer also taped his fingers to obviously prevent leaving any fingerprints behind. This murder seemed like a crime of passion, and it seemed like it had been premeditated. The weapon was also nowhere to be found. Her engagement ring and any other valuables in her home had not been touched, and it didn't look like her home had been ransacked in any way. Detectives at the time, though, were not releasing to the public if she had been sexually assaulted. She was found in her underwear, but this was possibly what she just simply went to bed in the night before. When it comes to what time her life may have been taken, one of Nancy's neighbors reported hearing screaming and running at around 1:30 in the morning. That neighbor, Alice Silva, told the Sacramento Bee it sounded like a baby's cry. Chief Deputy Fred Reese stated that the cries may have come from Nancy, and chances are she did not live much longer after the attack. Due to Nancy putting up such a fight, her killer had also been cut. There was a blood trail leaving her apartment. This blood from her killer is what would ultimately solve her case, but we'll get to that eventually. They had no idea who would want to hurt someone like Nancy, though. Yes, she worked as a court reporter and had come across a few questionable characters in her day, but she didn't really have any known enemies. There had been some declared persons of interest or suspects in her case at the very beginning, but were eventually ruled out. One of those being a man named Barry Segal. He was the roommate of the supervising district attorney in Sacramento, who had served 8 years for the murder of a woman in 1961. He was recently paroled for that murder, and they thought that possibly he went on to kill again, but it didn't seem like he had any involvement in Nancy's case. On November 7th, though, authorities released a sketch of an unknown man they deemed a possible suspect. According to the Sacramento Bee, residents of the area said they had recently seen a man prowling around. This man was said to be about 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed about 170 pounds. He looked about 25 years old, had dark brown hair that was worn in what was described as a Glen Campbell cut. He was last seen on Thursday, November 5th of 1970 at 1 p.m. near Arden Way and Watt Avenue. He was in a dark green Volkswagen and was wearing a long sleeve yellow shirt and yellow slacks. This was a sketch used in this case for quite a while of what her killer may look like. Nancy's murder was not the only one that this area had seen recently, though. There were also 2 other murders of young women in the area that police were focusing on. The first one being 23-year-old registered nurse Judith Ann Hikari, who was abducted from the parking lot of her apartment building at 1720 Markston Road. Her remains, beaten and strangled, were located in a shallow grave April 25th. The second one being 22-year-old Santa Rosa resident Carol Beth Hilburn. Carol's bludgeoned, nude body was found dumped in a field at the edge of the city on November 14th of 1970. They were thinking more so Judith's murder may have been connected to Nancy's for a few reasons. According to the Sacramento Bee, Lieutenant Jerry Salter, who is coordinating the investigations by the sheriff's office into Miss Hikari's and Miss Bennallack's killings, pointed out these similarities. They were slain on weekends late at night. Their faces were attacked. Neither victim put up a battle, but I do want to say that they did find out that Nancy did put up a fight. Both were single and working in professional fields. Both were engaged to be married, Miss Bennallack in a month and Miss Hikari in 3 months. Neither had made an announcement in a newspaper. Each had dark hair and a slightly protruding upper lip. Their apartments were only a long block apart. By line of sight, only a field separates them. Salter is quick to caution against drawing any conclusions from the closeness of the apartments. He said no evidence has been uncovered which gives this any significance, and it could be only coincidental. Hunting for humans, however, often is similar to hunting for game. Humans are creatures of habit, not always, but frequently enough to merit attention. People tend to do the same things in the same area, so officers cannot dismiss the fact of the apartment's closeness. Salter also pointed out differences between the cases. Miss Hikari was accosted outside. Miss Bennallack was assaulted inside her apartment. The nurse was struck by a blunt instrument, the other by a sharp, cutting weapon. Miss Bennallack was slain at the place of attack. Miss Hikari was kidnapped first. One more similarity stands out. Neither attack seemed to be a spur-of-the-moment impulse. Both Judith and Carol's cases are still unsolved to this day, but we will come back to Judith's a little bit later in this video. As for Nancy, she would be buried in Greenwood Memorial Cemetery in Grass Valley, Nevada, California, with her loved ones left wondering who did this to her and why. There were over 500 100 people questioned just within the first month of Nancy's murder, but it didn't seem like any of them were involved at the time, that is. It wouldn't be until 2004 that there would be an update in this case. During that year, they were able to create a DNA profile from the blood found leaving the crime scene. After that profile was made, they entered it into CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System. It is the FBI database for stored DNA of convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing persons. They were hoping that possibly a convicted offender in the system may be their man and that there would be a match. Someone who committed this horrible of a crime had to have committed another one as well and possibly had already been caught, right? Well, there were no matches to the DNA in the database. The culprit's DNA was in different databases for years, and there was simply never a match. Retired Sergeant Michaela Lynx took over the case in 2005, and she tried everything she could through the years to help solve this case. But it would not be until November of 2019 when there would be another update in this case, one that ultimately led to the solving of it. The department had recently learned of the method of genetic genealogy, which was the method that was used to catch the Golden State Killer the year prior. If you are not familiar with this method, it is where you take a DNA profile created from DNA and enter it into a genetic database and attempt to locate familial DNA. Sometimes this involves creating an entire family tree to narrow down who the offender could have been or who the unidentified individual could be. When the killer's DNA was used to go through with genetic genealogy, they would eventually locate relatives. They mapped out a family tree and came across a solid suspect. They notified the family of their findings, and the family gave up their DNA to directly compare to that relative's DNA. It was a match. On July 21st of 2022, they made the match, and on August 10th of 2022, they released the news to the public during a press conference. The man who jumped the back fence, climbed her balcony, made his way into her home, and brutally murdered her was a local man named Richard John Davis. By local, I mean extremely local, especially to her. He lived in the same apartment complex. He lived in apartment 23, she lived in 17. From where his apartment was located, he could see hers directly from his window. They were right across the apartment pool from each other. When it comes to a motive, Mickey Lynx has stated that there appeared to be no sexual assault, but that doesn't mean that that was not his original intention. She could have possibly fought back so hard that he wasn't able to. Everyone's main question though is probably, will there be any legal justice in this case? Unfortunately, not. Richard Davis, who was 27 at the time of the murder, died on November 2nd of 1997 at the age of 54 from alcoholism. The reason why his DNA was not in CODIS is because he had never been caught for another crime if he had actually committed one. He had no previous violent felonies. The only thing on his record was a DUI. Also, yes, he and his roommate were questioned back in 1970 by police, but they had what seemed like solid alibis for each other. Did they lie for each other? I don't know, but I guess his roommate did at the time, considering that Richard was the one who took her life. Mickey Lynx was quoted saying, "Clearly he intended to do what he did that day. This man put masking tape over every one of his fingers. I guess gloves weren't that easy to find those days to conceal his fingerprints. Were he alive, I think we're talking premeditated murder." During the press conference, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office read out a letter from Nancy's sister, Linda Cox. Part of it read, "After almost 52 years of missing my sister, we owe Mickey Lynx so much gratitude. How many times my husband, Tom, and myself have said, Nancy would love our ranch, all our animals, and land with wide open spaces. We have missed sharing our children and grandchildren and so much more." At the press conference, Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert said, "There's no doubt that justice in this case was dormant for decades. It is passion and persistence that brings these answers." Unfortunately, Nancy's fiance and parents are not around anymore to hear of the solving of her murder. Her fiance passed in 2014, her mother passed in 2009, and her father in 2003. Like I said before, I wanted to come back to Judith Hikari's case later on. In an article posted by Fox 40 back in 2016, Mickey Lynx stated that there is a strong belief that possibly Nancy and Judith's case could be connected. But in Judith's case, there is no DNA profile. The evidence was accidentally damaged years ago and it could never be tested. They never wanted to use distance as a strong similarity between the cases, but I do have to mention that Nancy and Judith's apartments were only 0.3 miles from one another, about a 2-minute drive. But even though Nancy's case has been officially solved and it was discovered that Richard Davis was responsible, we cannot say for certain if he also took the life of Judith Hikari. With the killer of Nancy Bennallack being deceased, we may never know. To many who look into Nancy's case, it really seems like it was a situation with stalker undertones. This was someone that lived extremely close to her. He could see her apartment from his. He possibly developed a secret infatuation with her. They could have had small interactions that she didn't really think anything of. From my research, it didn't really seem like she had confided in anyone about feeling unsafe or suspicious in general, or of him, or anyone having some sort of obsession with her. She wasn't receiving weird phone calls or letters or anything peculiar going on around her apartment. For him to choose a night when her fiance had left hours earlier, had Richard been watching her apartment that night? Did he know that she usually left the back sliding glass door open? Had he planned his attack for a while? What really was his motive? These are questions that we don't have the answers to. Nancy, of course, should have never lost her life, but her case was solved for one reason and one reason only, and that is because she fought back. We can't fully prevent things like this from happening because there are evil people in this world. I wish we could prevent them, but this is why experts say to fight as hard as you possibly can. To not only maybe get away from the person who is attacking you, but to leave DNA behind from that individual. If you can't manage to draw blood, try to rip their hair out and scratch as much as you possibly can to get their DNA under your fingernails or in the palms of your hands. That DNA can be crucial. But that is the case of Nancy Bennallack, one that I am so happy has finally been solved after so long. But it is a prime example of the type of cases that just break my heart. Ones that sit unsolved for so long, and when they're finally solved, no legal justice can be served because the individual is deceased. And it's somebody who maybe possibly never committed another crime, and if they did, they were never caught, and they just simply lived their life. They never truly had to pay for their wrongdoings. And I think there's only one thing worse than somebody who does something like this, is somebody who does something like this and then never feels bad enough about it to eventually come forward and just tell police what happened, to never themselves give the family closure. But like I stated at the beginning, this month is Solve September. So if there are any other solved cases that you possibly want me to cover here on my channel, make sure to send those over to gabulosiscaserequests@gmail.com. And with all that being said, I will see you all in the next one.